Hat, check. Sunglasses, check. Notes, check. Pepsi, check. Sources, check. Thick skin, check. Oh, and one more thing. 10,000 subscribers, check. Let's go! Y'all ever have that moment where you're like, aha, why didn't I think of that? I mean, I'm sure we all have it, and for conference realignment, I think I had that aha moment. I mean, there's been a lot of scenarios that we've talked about, a lot of possibilities, a lot of different avenues that we've explored. But today, I think I finally had that aha moment that makes everything make sense, including recent decisions and decisions that happened way in the past that's led up to this moment. And I think it centers around ESPN wants the Big 12 gone. That's the bottom line. And I think they have a plan in place to where the Big 12 is not going to exist for that much longer. But in order to talk about the now, we have to talk about the past. If you look at the past, the SEC has tried to make the Big 12 go away in the past. Remember, they got Missouri and Texas A&M to the SEC out of the Big 12, and then more recently they got Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC out of the Big 12. Now, I do think they made the mistake of allowing Nebraska, USC, and UCLA going to the Big 10. They probably should have bid harder on those teams. I don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but the Big 10 is now really, really strong, and Fox is a big-time competitor of ESPN. So I don't know if that was something that they could have avoided, but if it is, that was a big mistake on ESPN's part, because the Big 10, ESPN can't touch the Big 10, and ESPN can't touch Fox. So the Big 10 is going to be fine. They survived. So now what ESPN and all of its affiliates are trying to do is focus on the Big 12. They want the Big 12 gone. Their main TV rights are with Fox, and I think it's doable. First, let's look at the new time slots between the Big 10 and the SEC coming up in a few years. New time slots for the Big 10 starting in 2023. Noon, you're going to have the Big 10 on Fox. 3:30, you're going to have the Big 10 on CBS. And 7:30, you're going to have the Big 10 on NBC. Now, in 2024, that time slot stays the same for the Big 10, and then the new time slot for the SEC starts. Noon, the SEC on ABC and ESPN. 3:30, the SEC on ABC, ESPN. 7:30, the SEC or the ACC on ABC or ESPN. So they're going to be competing head-to-head for those time slots. And since ESPN kind of backed out of the negotiations for the Big 10, they have some time slots that they had to fill elsewhere with the Pac-12 and the ACC. Remember, ESPN has the main TV rights with the SEC, the ACC, and now the Pac-12, because Fox decided they weren't going to bid on the Pac-12. So you see what's going on here? ESPN backed off the Big 10, Fox backed off the Pac-12. But then there's the Big 12. The Big 12 is kind of the battleground. That's what's going to determine the future of college football. Fox and, quite frankly, the Big 10 want the Big 12 to continue to exist. That helps them. But ESPN, the SEC, the ACC, and the Pac-12, they want to see the Big 12 go away. They want to absorb those members. And here's how I think it goes down. First, this is why ESPN and the ACC are retalking their TV deal, trying to figure out those grant of rights. That way they can move the bigger brands from the ACC on up to the SEC, and then they're going to turn their attention on the Big 12 and backfill those spots that they lose to the SEC from the Big 12. That way the ACC is still going to make money. They still have some great brands, but at the same time they also want to continue to strengthen the SEC and the Pac-12, because remember, ESPN also has the main TV deals with the ACC and the Pac-12. So they still want to make money off those two conferences. So here's how I think it's going to shake out. I think they're going to send Baylor to the ACC. I think they're going to send BYU to the Pac-12. And I know that's a little bit of a stretch because the Pac-12 has already turned down BYU. That's going to be a problem with the liberal agenda of the Pac-12. But ESPN's going to be like, hey, this is for the greater good of everybody. So they're going to want BYU to the Pac-12. Cincinnati to the ACC. Houston is a little bit of an enigma, but I think their brand is getting bigger. And remember, they're in the top 5 TV market in the entire United States. So I think there's a chance that Houston could go to the SEC. Iowa State to the ACC. Kansas to the Pac-12. Kansas State to the Pac-12. Oklahoma State to the SEC. They're one of the biggest brands remaining. TCU to the ACC. Texas Tech to the Pac-12. UCF to the ACC. And West Virginia to the ACC. Now, the only thing that I'm not quite sure on is that last SEC slot. It could go to either Houston or West Virginia. To me, Houston to the SEC and West Virginia to the ACC makes the most sense, but it could be the other way around. It could be Houston to the ACC and West Virginia to the SEC. So in this particular scenario, the ACC would grab Baylor, Cincinnati, Iowa State, TCU, UCF, and West Virginia. Those are some pretty good brands, and I think that would make up for the losses of a Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State, and a Virginia. Those are the 4 top brands that the SEC ACC is seeking for now. That could change. Virginia could flip to a Miami, something like that, but it's going to be 4 of the top brands that's going to be bumped up to the SEC. And they're going to want to fill those slots with some good brands. Well, not only are you filling those 4 slots, you're adding 2 more slots. So that's why I think that makes up for the losses of those top 4 brands. Maybe not dollar for dollar because those are some big time brands, but the ACC is going to look pretty good by grabbing those 6 teams after losing those 4 big brands. Now the Pac-12, they'll be gaining BYU, Kansas, Kansas State, and Texas Tech. Now if the Pac-12 can avoid losing anybody else to the Big Ten, they're going to look like a really good conference with these games. And finally the SEC, they're already looking great, but they're still adding Houston and Oklahoma State. And like I said before, maybe Houston is swapped out for West Virginia. Houston goes to the ACC and West Virginia goes to the SEC. Either way, the SEC is fine. They're getting the 2 top brands. I just like Houston in the SEC because the SEC loves the state of Texas now, and Houston is a top 5 TV market. Remember, this is all about the money. So here's what all 4 of these conferences would look like after this happened. The SEC being by far the biggest conference and the most powerful. Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Missouri, South Carolina, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, Houston, Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, and Virginia. That is a very powerful conference right there. The Big Ten stays the same. Indiana, Maryland, Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Penn State, Rutgers, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, Northwestern, Purdue, Wisconsin, USC, and UCLA. So that would be some form of damage control for ESPN. Yes, the Big Ten is strong. They have some great brands, but at least you stop the bleeding. The Pac-12 actually looks pretty good under this scenario. Arizona, Arizona State, Cal, Colorado, Oregon, Oregon State, Stanford, Utah, Washington, Washington State, BYU, Kansas, Kansas State, and Texas Tech. Those 4 brands do not make up losses of USC and UCLA, but that Pac-12 looks a lot better than the current Pac-12 minus USC and UCLA. And finally, the ACC. This actually looks like it could be 3rd best conference under this scenario. Not as powerful as the Big Ten, and definitely not as big and powerful as the SEC, but still a pretty good looking conference. Boston College, Louisville, NC State, Syracuse, Wake Forest, Duke, Georgia Tech, Miami, Pitt, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Baylor, Cincinnati, Iowa State, TCU, and UCF. You have some great brands right there, but even better is you have some great rivalries that would make the ACC and ESPN a lot of money. In fact, this scenario would probably make ESPN more money than what the current ACC is making them, simply because of the rivalries that you would reunite. So this might not be the most powerful ACC, but it might be the most money-making ACC. And you also have to remember that by ESPN backing off from the TV rights to the Big Ten, that actually frees up a lot of money for ESPN, over $300 million. So they actually do have the money to beef up those other contracts with the Pac-12 and the ACC. So this is going to come down to ESPN throwing more money at the Pac-12 and the ACC to entice those teams out of the Big 12. And then on the other side, Fox is going to have to throw more money at the Big 12 to keep those teams from going elsewhere. So I think that was a really smart decision by ESPN backing off from the Big 10. I know it hurts because they can't broadcast Big 10 games anymore, but in the long run, they can put more money into the Pac-12 and the ACC and pick apart the Big 12. And to me, this explains why no teams in the Pac-12 have decided to go to the Big 12 just yet. Remember, we were hearing big time rumors, Arizona and Colorado, number 1, that they have applied to the Big 12 and that the Big 12 is expected to accept them. Well, that hasn't happened. In fact, we had several deadlines. First, it was a couple of weeks after the USC, UCLA announcement to the Big Ten. Then it was August 1st, the first official day of Brett Yormark being the Big 12 commissioner. And then it was August 4th. I don't really know what August 4th was, but those were deadlines that came and went. Nothing happened. We also heard that the Big 12 was interested in Utah and Arizona State to go along with Arizona and Colorado. Again, nothing. And of course, the 2 biggest names that the Big 12 wanted, Oregon and Washington. We definitely haven't heard anything from Oregon and Washington. All those teams are staying put for now. And that could be because of what ESPN wants to do. Maybe ESPN is like, hey, there's a reason why we're still bidding on your conference. We have a plan for the future. We want to bring in BYU, Kansas, Kansas State, and Texas Tech. And I know the Pac-12 probably would buck on the BYU idea, but hey, if it helps save the Pac-12, then maybe we should accept BYU. So that would make sense as far as Arizona, Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah saying no to the Big 12 for now. Maybe it still happens and they're just stalling and all this is just a waiting game, but there has to be an actual reason why those 4 teams are staying in a conference that looks like it could be dying. If there's no promise for the future, then there's no reason why these 4 teams should stay in the Pac-12, especially with the bad TV deal that's being talked about if the Pac-12 stays as is. So I still think there's something going on in the background, going on behind closed doors, and I think ESPN ESPN, with the conference that they have the main TV deals with, the ACC, the Pac-12, and the SEC, they're targeting the Big 12, and they want to split it up. Some go to the Pac-12, some go to the ACC, a couple go to the SEC. ESPN keeps making money off the Pac-12 and the ACC. The SEC gets even stronger, and boom, ESPN keeps its spot in the limelight in college football. Because remember, they're not taking down the Big Ten, and they're not taking down Fox as long as they're affiliated with the Big Ten. So their focus is going to turn to the Big 12. Now, I don't know what the timeline would be like. I think they would go after the ACC teams first. Because remember, we heard that ESPN and the ACC are talking about renegotiating that TV deal, opening up the grant of rights. And when you do that, you can bring in other bigger brands. And the biggest pushback that I get on that, well, if they open up the grant of rights, you're going to see a lot of teams bulk. Not necessarily. First of all, the top 4 brands going to the SEC, and then you convince these other brands, hold on, we're bringing in these 6 other teams so the ACC could be even better than what it was before, or at least the same. So there's no reason for you guys to go anywhere. And for the Big Ten, I don't think they're going to offer any equal shares if they did go after the ACC, like your Virginia Tech, your Miami, or any other teams that the Big Ten might go after. I think from here on forward, you're going to have to offer at least $100 million worth of worth if you want to get an equal share of the Big Ten. I just don't think that happens. I do think they will go after some teams in the ACC, but they're probably going to be offering some unequal shares. They're going to tell teams, well, you're not going to make the $100 million, but you can make $60 million or $70 million. And as long as ESPN can come up with a TV contract to where they can pay their ACC members $60, $70 million a year, they're not going anywhere. Because remember what I've said before, every ACC team fan base that I've talked to said, we love it in the ACC, we just don't like the money. So if ESPN can start approaching the amount that the Big Ten and the SEC makes without actually getting there, those teams will stay. I do think that $60 million is enough for a lot of those brands to stay in the ACC. So if you put this all together, it does make sense, and I think this spells trouble for the Big 12. And the biggest problem that the Big 12 has had in the past is being reactive and not proactive. And maybe once again that bites him in the rear end, but this time it spells the end for the Big 12. Y'all let me know in the comment section what you think about this. I think this is the final scenario. I think this is the thing that actually happens. So if you don't think this is the next phase, let me know what you think the next phase is going to be. That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.